Okay, ang check-in time, time check natin 51 minutos po pasado alas 7. Ayan, gabi ng Lunes, 8 po ng Enero 2024 mga kababayan, no? Okay, and then papasok tayo, mga kalimutan ko na, no? Papasok tayo sa ating programa. Okay, sa Consolidated News natin. Okay, sa gabing ito mga kababayan, no? Okay, dito rin sa ating halo-halo special opinion balita at iba pa. Kasama po serbisyo publiko, tinig ng mamamayan. Okay, magandang gabi sa inyo. Okay, good evening. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, no? Okay, dito tayo sa programa natin. Okay, sa himpilan ADLSNTV News Online International mga kababayan, no? Katulad sinabi ko na kanina, okay, dito po sa local ay maraming pwede pakinggan, no? Okay, 5 studio po rito sa Zamboanga City, no? Okay, so mga local news, kadami nila po ito, may mga programa dito sa Zamboanga, no? Okay, sa 98 Barangay sa Zamboanga City. Okay, good evening. Okay, assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, no? Okay. Follow up na itong latest po ng nangyari po diyan sa kaguluhan po diyan sa Middle East, no? O dito pa rin tayo. Ayan. Okay, papasok po ang programa Halo-Halo Special, Opinion, Balita at iba pa. Kasama po serbisyo publiko, tinig ng mamamayan at saka sumbungan ng mamamayan sa gabi nito, no? Okay, sana mauna si Tarhata Abdul Karim sa kanyang balita. Pero kung pumasok siya, okay, ikat ko itong pagbisita po ni Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. Okay, yan po sa area pag ay kaguluhan yan mga suki, no? Okay, so pakinggan natin kung ano ang kwento. Okay, para kayo na rin ng nakikinig po mga suki, no? Okay, ilang beses na pumunta, 5 beses na ata, no? O pakinggan natin po what is the latest po sa kanyang biyahe, kung saan makarating. Okay, wala pa rin kalutasan po ang problema na yan mga suki, no? Wala pa rin positive resort, okay, sa tigil putukan o kaya pag-release po ng 129 okay, hostages na sa kamay po ng mga militan. Okay, pakinggan natin ito para kayo na rin makinig. Okay, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay, pakinggan natin.
The U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is back in the Middle East for his 5th visit since Israel began its war on Gaza. His previous trips didn't bring any respite for Palestinians under bombardment. So what's the purpose of this visit? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Adrian Finnegan. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is back in the Middle East as Israel's war on Gaza rages on. Nearly 23,000 Palestinians have been killed and tens of thousands injured since early October. Many of the weapons used to kill them and flatten much of Gaza were supplied by the United States. Just over a week ago, as Blinken was preparing for this trip, he approved an emergency measure bypassing Congress to supply more tank shells to Israel. The State Department says that among the aims of Blinken's trip is in part to help civilians stem violence and reduce regional tension. But how will he achieve that? Or is this visit more about PR than reality? We'll explore these issues with our guests in just a moment. But first, a report from Katia Lopez Horayan.
The top U.S. diplomat has traveled to the Middle East 5 times in 3 months. Anthony Blinken's latest tour comes as fears rise that Israel's war on Gaza could ignite a wider regional conflict.
A big part of the conversations we'll be having over the coming days with all of our allies and partners is looking at the steps that they can take, using the influence and ties that they have to do just that, to make sure that this conflict doesn't spread.
Despite the huge death toll in Gaza, the U.S. has continued to be Israel's biggest backer, providing billions of dollars worth of military aid and weapons, and vetoing a UN resolution for an immediate ceasefire. Critics say Washington has not changed the intensity of Israel's attacks.
This administration has put forward no red lines, no ultimatums. There's been no conditioning of aid, none of that. So I do think that this chaotic situation in the region, which can always get further out of control, has a lot to do with the policies of the Biden administration.
Negotiations to secure the release of Israeli captives is on Blinken's agenda. Also on the list, he says, are finding ways to deliver more food, fuel, and medicine into Gaza. With more than 2 million Palestinians displaced, it's not clear what difference Blinken's visit will make.
People stand in line and go around looking for a way to find water for their children. We have so many problems. In the camp, there is no water.
No.
Okay, paunahin natin muna, balikan mo natin si Blinken, no? Okay, sandali lang. Okay, sorry po, ito paunahin natin. Okay.
No service, no medical attention or hygiene.
Tensions between Washington and Tehran are also unfolding in the Red Sea. Iran-backed Houthi rebels have attacked commercial vessels for weeks, a way, they say, to pressure Israel to stop its war on Gaza. And now, 3 months into Israel's bombing of the Strip, Blinken's visit will test the power of diplomacy. And it may also give more insight into the extent the U.S. is prepared to go in backing Israel. Katia Lopez Horayan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, on the day of Blinken's visit to Qatar, home of the Al Jazeera network, Israel targeted and killed Hamza al-Dabdoul, the surviving son of Al Jazeera's bureau chief in Gaza, Wael al-Dabdoul, who'd already lost most of his family members in an Israeli strike back in October. Hamza's targeted killing brought a strong response from Qatar's Minister of State for International Cooperation, Lola Rashid al-Khatta, who condemned, quote, the brutal occupation machine and everyone who contributed and agreed. All right, let's bring in our guests for today's discussion. From Weston in Virginia, we're joined by Trevor Pass.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So, okay, live ka na. Mag-intro ka na. Bakit maingay? Bakit may background?
Okay, sir, on the air na.
Okay. On the air ka na.
Okay, maraming salamat, sir, at assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh sa lahat po ng ating mga tagapakinig. Isang magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Ito sa ADLSNTV News Online, Servisyo Publiko, Tinig ng Mamamayan. At sa ating ulat sa ating mga area of responsibility, dapat listahan ng Bar ang white crystal substance na nagkakaalaga ito ng 4 million pesos. Kaya naman, huli sa kinasang drug buy-bust operation ng PDEA at PNP ang isang asilong polis at isang babaeng kasama nito sa bahay ng Quezon Avenue Parang Road sa Cavite City alas 7 ng gabi. Matagumpay na nahuli ang nasabing polis at ang kasama nitong babae kung sabi sa PDEA undercover agent pala ang kanilang katransaksyon at nagbibentahan ng nasabing shabu. Abot sa 4 million pisong halaga ng shabu, umano ang nakapiska sa dalawang suspect na kinilalang si Staff Sergeant Mochi Vitario City na nakadistino sa Sultan Kudarat Municipal Police Station, habang kinilala naman ang kasama nitong babae na si Farida Alim Alfonso. Nakuha sa dalawang mga suspect ang 12 kasasye ng hinihinalay white crystalline substance na may estimated value ng 4,080,000 pesos at iba pang mga kagamitan nito. Sa kasalukuyan ngayon ay nakakulong ang mga suspect sa PDEA Custodial Facility kung saan nakatakdang sampahan ng kasong paglabag sa RA 9165 o Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act. Kaya naman nagtagubay ang ikinasang operasyon sa pakikipagtulungan ng PDEA Farm Marine Battalion Landing Field 5 dito sa lungsod ng Cotabato Police Station 1 at iba pa. Samantala sa iba pang ulat, komersyo sa Langitan City umunlad umano at mas pinaiksig pa ang seguridad ang komersyo sa Langitan. Kaya naman lalo pang pinalawig pa ng pulisya at militar ang seguridad sa Langitan City kaugnay ng inisyatibo ng mga lokal na sektor na mapabuti ang imahe ng lungsod sa mga kapitalistang negosyante ng mga tagalabas. Anya ang Langitan City, Isabela City at 11 pang mga bayan sa Brazilian ay kilala na ngayon bilang bagong investment hub ng Bangsamoro Region o ligtas sa destinasyon ng mga investors mula sa iba't ibang rehiyon at sa ibang bansa. Resulta ng pagsuko ng mahigit 400 o 400 na mga miyembro ng Abu Sayyaf sa probinsya mula noong 2016. Sa inisyatibo ito ng mga lokal na government units ng pulisya at ng 101st Infantry Brigade. Ayon umano sa pahayag nitong Sabado, January 6, 2024, ni Brigade General Alvin Luzon, commander ng 101 o 101st Infantry Brigade, kasama sila Lamitan City Mayor Roderick Farigay, si Basilan Governor Haji Man Saliman, ang Lamitan City Police Station at ang Basilan Provincial Police Office sa kanilang pagbabatay sa lungsod at upang mapanatili ang kapayapaan na naramdam na ngayon sa barangay na sakop nito. Ang 45 na barangay na sakop ng Lamitan City ay akma para sa malawakang propagasyon ng Cavendish banana na naibibenta sa ibang bansa, mga short-term crops katulad ng hybrid corn at mga exotic fruits gaya ng lansunis, durian at mangosteen. Ayon sa mga opisyal ng Agriculture, Trade and Investment Ministry ng Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao or NCIT dito sa lungsod ng Cotabato, Minister Abu Amri Tariq. So, sa iba pang ulat, iba yung paghahanda ngayon ng ika-5th founding anniversary ng Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. Kaya naman, nalalapit na ang anniversary ng pagkakatatag ng BARM government at ngayon ay pinaghahandaan na. Pinangunahan ito ni BARM Assistant Senior Minister at Project Tabang, Manager Abdullah Dong Kusain, ang pagpupulong bilang bahagi ng paghahanda sa ibang selebrasyon ng ika-5th founding anniversary sa pagkatatag ng BARM government. At ito ay isinagawa sa Ridi BARM nito lamang Enero 5, 2024, araw ng Biyernes. Ito ay ang pangunahing ayunin ay upang lalo pang mapaghandaan at mapag-usapan ng masinsinan ng lahat ng ministries ang nakatakdang mga programa at ang posibleng mga aktibidades na nauukol sa gaganaping payak na selebrasyon. Ngunit payak na selebrasyon ng anniversary ng BARM government, ngunit ito ay kakaiba paghahanda compare sa naunang taon. So, ito ay dinuluhan itong Biyernes ng mga ministries at pang mga ahensya ng pamahalang Bangsamoro at Autonomous Region Muslim Mindanao. At sa pagiging masaya, makulay at kapaki-pakinabang ang darating na selebrasyon ng pagdiriwang ng ika-5 taong pagkakatatag ng Bangsamoro Government sa ni BARM Assistant Senior Minister Project Tabang Manager Abdullah Dong Kusayin. At dagdag pa ni Tabang Manager Dong Kusayin na ipagpapatuloy pa rin ang paghahatid ng magagandang programa at ang serbisyo para sa mga mamamayang BARM sa pamumuno ni BARM Chief Minister Ahud Balawag Ibrahim Al-Haj. Samantalang sa iba pang ulat,
Go ahead.
Parliament page, ayon sa Parliament page na ating pong nakalap na balita, ay nakatakda na umano Sir Abs ang mga talaan ng o schedule ng public consultation para sa BTA Bill number 267 o ito isang batas na nagtatakda para sa paglikha ng parliamentary district sa Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. At ito'y nakasaad ay sa BTA Parliament sa kanilang pahina Bangsamoro Transition Authority Public Consultation BTA number 267 an act providing for the creation of parliamentary districts in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. Kaya naman this coming January 15, 2024 ay magkakaroon ng public consultation BTA number 267 dito sa lungsod ng Cotabato BARM. And then, ganun din sa January 16 o Enero 16, 2024 ay gaganapin naman sa Parang, Maguindanao del Norte. And kasama na doon ang special geographic area like Mitsayap and North Cotabato on January 16. And then to January 18, 2024, Salano del Sur and Marawi City and Maguindanao del Sur, Sheriff Aguap. So sa 18, tatlo, Salano del Sur, Marawi City, Maguindanao del Sur. So, dalawa rin. So, this coming January 29 naman, 2024, ay magkakaroon din ng what you call this, public consultation sa may Tawi-Tawi or Bungaw, Sulu, 1st District or Patikul, Sulu, 2nd District, Lorok. So, tatlo. Sa Tawi-Tawi, Sulu, and Sulu 1 and Sulu 2 District. So, January 30 naman, o sa katapusan ng Enero 2024, ay pinakahuli dyan sa Darfilan, Isabela City. Yes, sir. Meron pa ba tayong oras para sa aking final report?
Sige, go ahead.
Okay, anyway, sa ating final report, ayon sa ating nakalap na balita kasamang Sir Abs, magkakaroon umano ng facing the media training. So ayon dito sa sinabi umano ni MILG Bar Minister Attorney Sheila Dumama Alba, ang bagong MILG Minister, ay magkakaroon ng training. Ang lahat ng mga members of the Parliament at Minister ng BARM Government sa pakikipag-ugnayan ng sa mga media practitioner upang mas mapalakas umano ang pagbibigay ng mas makabuluhan at up-to-date na impormasyon sa publiko. So, ayon kay Attorney Dumama Alba ay ngayong buwan ng Enero ay tinatawag na Facing the Media Training. At ito ay katuwang dito ay ang Bangsamoro Information Office or BIO. So ayon sa kanya, sa ganitong pamamaraan o pagsasanay ay kay Mr. Sheila Dumama ay maging maganda ang collaboration and coordination ng ating mga member of parliament at ang ministeryo sa mga kagawad ng media practitioners. So, magkakaroon ng easy access ayon sa kanya and up-to-date na informasyon kung kinakailangan na malaman sa publiko.
Okay, maganda.
Yes, Sir Abs?
Okay, maganda ang umpisa po ni itong si Elijah. Okay, emergency attorney Elijah Dumaba Alba, no? Okay, yun ang okay.
Dumaba Alba.
Okay, yun ang maganda na may ugnayan po ang mga tagapamahayag sa kanila, no? Sa BARM government. Okay, mag-participate ka. Okay.
Yes, inshallah, kung tayo ay papalaring Sir Abs, actually kanina nandun tayo sa MILG kasama ng ating mga young media practitioner like PSCBSI News and what we call this VND News. Kasama po natin kanina at nakapag-appointment na tayo kaso nagkaroon sila ng meeting sa loob ng MILG at marami pang mga bisita. Si Attorney Dumama, no? Galing pa ng iba't ibang lugar like Sulugan sila na marami siyang visitor kanina at isa pa lahat ng kanyang mga kawani diyan sa BTA ay kanyang nagkaroon sila ng meeting. So unahin muna niya yung mga sa loob ng kanyang opisina bago siya nag-entertain ng ibang mga bisita or courtesy visit.
Okay.
Doon sa napakalaking lugar. Kung dito lang sa Cotabato, okay naman. Pwede pa naman i-extend yung appointment kung as possible.
Saan ginanap ang training ng mga media yan? Diyan lang sa Cotabato o sa ibang lugar?
So far, Sir Abs, kaya nga kanina gusto natin mag-interview kay Attorney Dumama kaso hindi pa tayo nagkaroon ng pagkakataon dahil naging abala po siya kanina. Gusto ko nating makapanayam at makuha ang kanyang suggestion or kanyang opinion about this, kung kailan mag-umpisa at kung saan ito at saan ito gagawin at paano makikipag-participate ang ating mga kapwa media practitioner na talaga ng mga what we call this, mga media industry sa ating bangsamoro sa Muslim Mindanao.
Sabihin mo kay Attorney Arba Dumama, ang outfit natin ay corporation na, no? Okay, hindi na basta-basta po ng hindi na basta-basta po. Kung kailangan niyo mga document, okay, padala natin mga document natin. Basta corporation na po ang outfit natin, no? Yun ang imensahe mo sa kanya kung meron ka chance. Bahala ka naman diyan na kasi hindi ako makatravel na hindi ako makatravel tatama. Parang nahirapan ako mag-travel.
May nagtatanong sir, kailan ka daw pupunta dito sa Mindanao, sa Cotabato?
Yun na nga kuan lang sana kung malakas pang katawan natin, gusto ko mag-travel diyan, no? Pero yun na nga. Medyo
kasi in case of papalarin tayo at makikipag-ugnayan si Attorney Alba, baka kung papalarin tayo makasali, siguro pwede naman tayo sumali lahat dito sa ADLSN. Yung malapit lang dito like at yung mga active media practitioner natin dito sa ADLSN.
Noted. Wala pang problema. Basta dyan ka na, dyan ang ADLSNTV News Corporation. Okay. Wala na problema. Basta nandiyan ka na. Okay, wala na represent mo ng outfit natin. Okay, Tata.
Yes, sir. Yeah. While I'm reporting this, saan ka po ba nag-live? Sa YouTube or sa Facebook? Para sa kaalaman ng ating mga taga-pakinig for their information at saan nila mapapanood.
Sa Facebook meron tayo. Okay, sa YouTube meron tayo at saka sa ibang katulad ng X. Okay, X dating Twitter. So ngayon X na.
Okay.
Kay Elon Musk. Okay, papasok tayo diyan po. Tata pag mag-live ako rito, automatic papasok na 'yon, no? Dati marami 'yon, pati mga Pinterest papasok tayo, pero ewan ko, hindi ko na check ang Pinterest. Basta marami. Okay, marami. Okay, dati sa mga LinkedIn na papasok tayo. Okay.
Anyway, after your program, may share natin yan, sa Madla. Kaya naman para sa kaalaman ng ating mga tagapakinig na tayo po naman ay muli nagbabalik dahil 3 months po tayo nawala, no? Since meron tayong equal important dito sa ating trabaho.
Okay, mag-aral ka. Kasi galing ka mag-aral. Okay, Tatay, mag-exo ka na. Kasi marami pa kung news.
Okay, yan muna ang ating ulat. Mula dito sa lungsod ng Cotabato sa Marotoro Muslim Mindanao. Para sa ADLSNTV News Online, Service Public Patinig ng mamamayan na si Terton Karim reporting.
Salamat. Okay, salamat Tata. Sige, mag-break muna tayo.
Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. From Dubai, Hafsa Halawa, an independent consultant who works on political, social, and economic affairs across the Middle East, North Africa, and the Horn of Africa. And in Washington, D.C., Gagat Bhagat, Professor of National Security Affairs at the National Defense University's Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Study. A warm welcome to you all. Before we talk about Antony Blinken's visit to the region, I just want to take a moment to address the targeted killing of Hamza Abdul, son of our Gaza bureau chief, Wael Abdul, on the very day that Blinken arrives in Qatar. Our previous visits by Blinken have coincided with major Israeli actions against Palestinians. Back in October, more than 1 million Palestinians were ordered to leave northern Gaza while Blinken was in Israel. An explosion along one of the so-called safe routes killed 70 people. A few days later, on October 17th, Israeli attacks on the Al-Aqli Baptist Hospital killed 471 people. During yet another Blinken visit in November, Israel targeted a UN-run school in the Jabalia refugee camp. At least 15 people were killed, dozens more were injured. At the end of the brief ceasefire in December, Israel resumed its attacks. Its forces increased their strikes in the southern Gaza Strip a day after Secretary of State Antony Blinken urged Israel to do more to protect civilians. And now, during Blinken's latest visit, the son of our Gaza bureau chief, Hamza al-Dafour, has been killed by an Israeli airstrike in southern Gaza. Twitter, are the Israelis trying to send some sort of message here, do you think? Or this can't be just coincidence, can it?
It certainly doesn't come across as a coincidence, and it's very clear that the number of journalists killed in this conflict far exceeds that of any other recent conflict, more than 100 so far. And I think it's also affected the reporting coming out of Gaza in the sense that we're seeing less images, less reporting, precisely because those who can report have been silent. Given the fact that the Israelis are resisting even the very limited pressure that Biden is putting on them in regards to how to handle the war in Gaza, it wouldn't be surprising as this is one of their efforts to up the ante right before Blinken arrives in the region in order to signal how much they will resist any effort by the Biden administration that doesn't come with clear pressure, such as putting the aid to Israel to make it contingent upon them living up to certain standards. As long as there's no real pressure, it seems that Israelis will continue to behave in this way.
We'll discuss, we'll come to pressure and what pressure can be applied to the Israelis in just a few moments. But first, Hafsa, Blinken says that he'll be looking at what can be done to maximize the protection of civilians in Gaza and increase deliveries of humanitarian assistance. But with more than 22,000 dead now, many of them women and children, does that ring hollow to you? It's too little too late, isn't it?
Well, I think it's not just too little too late, Adrian, and thank you very much for having me. I think it's also completely false. Nothing in the US's real policy actions beyond certain doublespeak that we see or tweets that are written by the teams of everybody from the Secretary of State to the President of the United States and other members of the government seems to signal that there is any material pressure on Israel, not just to protect civilians or to prevent this level of civilian death, but also, in fact, to bring this war to any kind of conclusion or to halt the current hostilities that we see in Gaza or in the West Bank or occupied East Jerusalem. At the end of the day, nothing that we've seen since October 7th from anyone in this administration signals that the US is anything but supportive of this war, and really the red lines seem to hinge on how much they're willing to back the expansion of this conflict by Israel.
Professor Bhagat, just a week ago, as we were hearing, Blinken approved the sale to Israel of 155mm artillery shells and related equipment, determining that the emergency required the immediate sale to Israel, thereby waiving congressional review requirements. And yet here he is in the region, supposedly to talk peace. I mean, this visit reeks of hypocrisy, doesn't it?
The United States has very consistent policy to stop the war, and it is important to point out that Israel does not listen all the time to United States, and in American media lately, they highlighted some kind of disagreement between Biden administration and the government of Netanyahu. And I believe also it is important to understand there is difference between private diplomacy and public diplomacy. United States government, it will not help to go in front of camera and condemn Israel. But my understanding, senior American officials, when they meet with their Israeli counterparts, they push as hard as they can to use smart weapons to minimize the killing of innocent people, because escalation is against the U.S. national interest.
Trevor, what do you make of that? Does the US have any sway over the Israeli government, any leverage at all, given what we were hearing there from the professor? And he said that Israel just isn't listening to the US. To what extent is the current situation directly the fault of the Biden administration's policy? How much of the blame for the current suffering in Gaza does the US have to bear?
Well, the Israelis are not listening because they don't have to listen, because the United States is not making them listen. The idea that the United States is much tougher in private may be true, but it's not tough enough because we're not seeing any effect of it. Reality is the United States has a tremendous amount of leverage. It is choosing not to use it. The United States has shipped 10,000 tons of weapons and ammunition to Israel since the beginning of this war. According to an Israeli major general in an interview last month, he made it very clear, if the United States were to halt the flow of weapons and ammunition to Israel, Israel would not be able to continue this fight. It's very clear that the United States has leverage, but choosing not to use it. And that raises the question that you just asked, to what extent is then the United States also responsible for the killings that are taking place right now? And I think the Biden administration is somewhat nervous, as they should be, about the complaint of the South African government accusing Israel of genocide and taking this to the International Court of Justice. If Israel is found to be guilty of genocide, it will have implications for the United States as well, mindful of its extensive aid to Israel during this period.
Why, Trevor, is the US not pressuring Israel when it's not happy with what's going on?
Well, I'm not so sure that it's not happy, because reality is that the earlier impression that the Biden administration was trying to stop this but didn't have leverage, I don't think has been proven to be compatible with reality. Biden signed on to the Israeli military objective of eliminating Hamas. He wanted Israel to do to Hamas what the United States could not do to the Taliban. Because of that, he has stood in the way of any ceasefire, any attempt to bring the war to an end, short of first having eliminated Hamas. And that's why I think we have to accept that the United States is actually in support of this policy. It is not trying to stop it.
Perhaps I know you want to come in. Let me just throw it back to Professor Lagarde, though. You wanted to say something there.
Thank you. There is no doubt that United States has a lot of leverage. U.S. foreign aid to Israel is huge, but also it is important not to underestimate Israel as sovereign country. And Israel is one of the richest countries in the world and one of the strongest military power in the Middle East and in the world. Israel does not take orders from the United States. And basically, United States, like any country, does what it believes is in its best interest. And escalation in the Middle East, killing innocent people, this is bad for the United States. And I have no doubt that the United States wants to end the war, to minimize the killing of innocent people. And there are many disagreements between US and Israel. One of them about eliminating Hamas. The United States does not believe that Hamas can be eliminated. Hamas is part of the Palestinian civil society. Hamas is a political military movement, and the United States in my mind, understand that Israeli goals cannot be achieved.
Hafsa, I know you wanted to come in there, but I'll ask you another question as well. Blinken urged Middle Eastern countries to use their influence over regional actors to ensure that the conflict is contained in order to prevent, quote, an endless cycle of violence. But why? Why put the onus on allies in the region when, as we were discussing, it's the US that holds the key here? If it called for a ceasefire, put pressure on Israel and stop using its veto at the Security Council, and also stop supplying Israel with weapons, the violence would end more or less immediately, wouldn't it?
I agree, and I think fundamentally to sort of go back, and I actually agree completely with Chita, but I also agree with Professor Magath that ultimately this is a US administration that over the last 3 years has fundamentally misunderstood all the regional players, actors, and countries in the Middle East, North Africa, misunderstood national security goals, targets, misunderstood the relationships between each other and the targeted relationships with the United States. And by extension, what Blinken has been doing on this trip, will do on this trip, and on previous trips and other visits from the Secretary of Defense and visits we've seen in the past from Bill Burns and others, is really this fundamental belief that Washington still has, that this region revolves its foreign policy around Washington. And that simply is not true any longer. It may have been true 20 years ago, it may have been true 30 years ago, it may even have been true 15 years ago, but over the last few years, we've seen a real reckoning of that, a broader independent foreign policy emerge from individual countries. Collectively, as a region, there is a drive to look outwards. And the US's policies, particularly its military and security policies, have been found wanting either in the fact that the US hasn't served these countries with their national security interests in protecting them, particularly if we look at the last few years and the precarious fluctuation of relationships between the Arab Gulf countries, Iran, and other spaces. And primarily, the US has not been seen as a country that is willing to really come forward and put its neck out and support the states that it has for decades committed to supporting, except for Israel. And since 1948, the instability in this region at its heart comes down to the illegal occupation of the Palestinian people. It always has done. And America has regularly, under all leadership, failed to come to terms with that. One would argue even the failure to enact what was agreed successfully at Oslo and other major inflection points in this border conflict over the last 75 years. And now is no different. What President Biden or Secretary of State Blinken have been attempting to do with regional leaders is to bring them onto the same page as the United States, which is to see this war as an existential crisis for Israel, to see the non-state actors in the region as behaving not in the national security interest or public interest of this region, which they may very well be doing. However, when the US sends its warships into the Mediterranean, creates these protection forces in the Red Sea, deploys its navy to these areas, it's not received by any of these actors or even the court of public opinion as protection or guardianship, as they like to call it. It's seen as provocation and antagonism. And what we're seeing is the non-state actor response to that.
Look, Professor, I saw you raise your eyebrows at one point there. I couldn't tell whether you were in agreement or not, but do you want to come in?
Yeah, if I may, I want to make 2 brief points. The first point, the war in Gaza underscores that United States is by far the main foreign power with great influence, great capability to make peace or war. It is not Russia, it is not China, it is not European Union. Everybody comes to Washington when Secretary Blinken goes to the region. Everybody pays attention. It is United States. The second point is there is no doubt that United States has close ties to Israel, but also the conflict in Gaza highlights the failure of Arab countries to lobby United States. United States has very close ties to Saudi Arabia, to Qatar, to UAE, to Egypt, to almost all countries in the region. they have not been able to convince the administration, the Congress, the American public to take even-handed, balanced approach to the conflict. And Arab countries have to use the leverage they have to lobby in more effective way the American people, the administration, and the Congress.
Trita, you recently wrote at thenation.com that President Biden refuses to pursue the most obvious way of de-escalating tensions and of avoiding American deaths. That's a ceasefire in Gaza. And you asked, is Israel going to drag the US into another ruinous regional war? Is it?
Well, we see today that the Israelis are increasingly inclined to expand the war into Lebanon. The Biden administration does oppose that. The Biden administration is skeptical. There's an article in Washington Post today about the intelligence assessment of the lack of feasibility for Israel to win such a conflict. And the Biden administration says that from the very outset, the Israelis had the intent. In fact, in the early stages of the war, they wanted to go into Lebanon right away, but the Biden administration thwarted that. It seems, however, that we're back to square one, because the Israelis are trying to do this. The U.S. does oppose it. But the question is, will American opposition to this be coupled with real pressure, or will it continue to be what we have seen so far, which is that Blinken goes to the region and asks other countries to put pressure on Hezbollah, on the Houthis, on Iran, while the U.S. itself does not put any material pressure on Israel. That equation will not work in the long run. We have frankly been quite lucky so far that we haven't seen an escalation. And in regards to the point of the ceasefire, if we take a look at the activities of Iraqi militias, they attacked U.S. troops 6 times the day before the ceasefire. But as soon as the ceasefire broke out, the attacks from Iraqi militias went down to 0 for 6 days. Not a single attack. Even the Houthis reduced their attacks. There was only 1 attack during that 6-day period that we can confidently attribute to the Houthis. It's very clear. The message from them is, just listen to what the Houthis themselves are saying, that they will cease their attacks if there is a ceasefire. And even though this seems to be the easiest way to actually avoid an escalation, it's the one path that the Biden administration refuses to pursue, which goes back to my earlier point. There is a commitment by the Biden administration to the destruction of Hamas, which is part of the reason I think that we see the Biden administration refusing even measures that would avoid the escalation that Biden said that he wants to do.
We already know that Blinken secured a pledge from Turkey's President Erdogan to use his country's influence to prevent the conflict broadening further. But Erdogan, as we know, is a harsh critic of Washington's support for Israel's Gaza campaign. He's rebuffed US pressure to cut off suspected Hamas funding, which flows through Turkey, defending the group as legitimately elected liberators fighting for their land. How sincere do you think was his pledge to use his influence to prevent this spiraling? And what sort of reception is Blinken going to get when he lands in other regional capitals this week?
Well, I think the question really is, going back to Trita's point, is what kind of leverage can you put on these non-state actors, particularly when they have very clearly defined their red lines for engagement? And part of what the US is failing to acknowledge is this is not just about Israel's desire to expand this conflict. This is about how much longer will the United States let this war continue and effectively on the ground end the quest for Palestinian statehood, because that will throw us into a perpetual cycle of violence, insurgency, threats of violence and acts by these non-state groups in the region. That could become a perpetual cycle that never ends. And part of what is mind-boggling, if you give Washington the benefit of the doubt that it does not seek that end resolution, is, well, what does it seek? What does it seek to achieve in Gaza? What does it seek to achieve in this relationship with Israel? What is it seeking to protect effectively? Even for Israel, the broader relationships that the regional parties that are either normalized or peaceful allies or peaceful partners and neighbors of Israel. What kind of part of the relationship can be salvaged after all of this, beyond just looking at the pressure on groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Hashd al-Sha'bi in Iraq? I mean, their ideology is very clear. Their red lines in this conflict has been very clear. Their raison d'être for decades has been very clear. That's going to be very difficult to change. And learned people have long said the response and the answer to quelling the power of these groups is to seek a two-state solution. Clearly, that is not what is being sought through this conflict, through this escalation of violence, through this bombardment by either Israel or Washington, the United States and European allies. What that then extends us to ask is, what about the effect on other countries, and what kind of reception does Blinken receive in other capitals? Well, what kind of reception has he received in capitals in the last 8 to 12 weeks? It certainly hasn't been very pleasant. It certainly hasn't been very welcoming. He's been publicly rebuked by the foreign ministers of Jordan and Egypt. He was, embarrassed by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. All of this feeds into a broader court of public opinion, not just at a moment where anti-American sentiment has been very high and is certainly sky high. But whilst Americans may not be seeing as much of this conflict on their screens here in the region, we're consuming it still 24/7 as if it's October 8th. The level of violence, you mentioned and you mentioned Hamza Dahdour, who was killed this afternoon by an Israeli airstrike. I mean, this stuff is playing on our TV screens regularly. Arab social media is constant on this.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're almost out of time. Professor, I'll give you the last word. Is this visit by Blinken to the region then anything more than cheap window dressing? I mean, is his diplomacy going to be able to do anything to ease the plight of those suffering in Gaza? Is it going to bring about a ceasefire? Is it going to be able to prevent this conflict from spiraling into a wider regional one?
No, absolutely. It is not window dressing. It is because it's very complicated. It takes time, and there is no guarantee that it will work and succeed. It is the fourth visit of the secretary in just few months. And it is also important that Arab countries like Israel do not take orders from United States. Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, all of them, and Turkey, all of them resisted American pressure. And I want to end on positive note. There is generation gap, generation change in the United States. Young people in the United States, all over American universities, are demonstrating against Israel. So it is very sad what is happening now. Many innocent people are dying, but in the long run, I believe there is change in American public opinion, and this will be reflected in American policy.
I'm afraid we must end the program. Many thanks indeed to all of you for being with us today. Trevor Parsi, Hafsa Halawa, and Gaudat Bagat, I'm sorry. As always, thank you for watching. Don't forget you can see the program again at any time by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X, our handle, at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finnegan, and the team here in Doha. We'll see you again. Bye for now.
Okay, let's hear Secretary Anthony Blinken, no? Okay, saan ito sa Qatar? Okay, pakinggan natin naman kung ano naman na okay, latest na galing sa kanya mga suki, no? Okay.
We also must work toward lasting peace and security. The United States has a vision for how to get there, a regional approach that delivers lasting security for Israel and a state for the Palestinian people. In my meetings on this trip, we also discussed what each country can do to provide the assurances and the incentives required to build a more secure, a more stable, a more peaceful future for the region. And my takeaway from the discussion so far, including here with our friends in Qatar, is that our partners are willing to have these difficult conversations and to make hard decisions. All of us feel a stake in forging the way forward. All of us recognize that we have to work together. That is the only way forward, and it cannot wait. So I look forward to carrying on these discussions with more partners in the days ahead. Thank you.
The first question for the Excellency of the Prime Minister, do you see so many changes in the region and there are so many targets or leaders like Saleh al-Arouri in Beirut and also Hezbollah leaders in Syria and also inside Iran. What is the implication of that on the region, and does that have anything to do with the Qatari mediation?
Journalists being done by the IDF, including our colleague, son of our colleague, Mahmoud Hamza Wa'ad al-Tahlou. What is the situation? Is the United States condemned targeting journalists, innocent journalists? And what is the situation? What is the position of the United States government in this case?
Concerning your question in relation to the escalation that we witnessed in Yemen since the beginning. Since the beginning, we have warned of the expansion of the crisis, and this is a likelihood, and it's a threat to everyone in the region. So the importance of working together and our joint efforts need to be to stop this war, to stop the spread of the conflict, and that was our main focus, and also took a big part of our talks with my friend Mr. Blinken. Recent events that we have witnessed, whether in Lebanon or in Syria, are unfortunately a violation to the sovereignty of those countries, and we can see also continuous violations. However, our main target, our purpose is the stop of this war and to avoid the bigger escalation in the region. The state of Qatar is always seeking, by working with all the parties, in order to defuse and de-escalate, and work also closely with our friends, the Americans and other countries, to reach that result. As I have mentioned before, we believe that the solution is to stop this war in Gaza, and we believe that will have a positive implication on our whole region.
I am deeply sorry for the almost unimaginable loss suffered by your colleague, Consolidinated. I'm a parent myself. I can't begin to imagine the horror that he's experienced, not once, but now twice. This is an unimaginable tragedy, and that's also been the case for, as I said, far too many innocent Palestinian men, women, and children. Civilians, also journalists, Palestinian and others. The Committee to Protect Journalists has found that now some 70 journalists have been killed in Gaza. One is far too many. And the value that we place upon their work, your work, in bringing information, facts to the world, it's never been more important. So, this is why we are pressing the need, the imperative, not only of making sure that humanitarian assistance can get to people who need it, but that people are protected from harm from this conflict in the first place. And ultimately, it's why ending the conflict and finding, we just discussed, a genuinely durable, lasting peace where Israel does not have to fear the repeat of October 7th. And men, women, and children can live in peace and security in Gaza, in the West Bank, wherever they may be.
So I'm having the second question from the French news agency.
Callum from AFP. Prime Minister Thani, I was wondering if you could give us a status report on Qatari mediation efforts on the possible hostage exchange between Israel and Hamas and troops in Gaza, and whether strike on Hamas deputy leader in Beirut on Tuesday has produced a particular obstacle to these efforts. And to Secretary Blinken, the same question really. Is there any pressure Washington can bring to that? Talked about doing everything we can, but are there any specifics you can mention to bring about a hostage exchange of the kind that we saw in November and two strikes of the kind that we saw on Tuesday in Beirut, put that kind of mediation out of reach?
Well, thank you very much. Actually, regarding the negotiations, it has been ongoing. Yes, we got challenges ups and downs throughout the process. And of course, having one of the senior leader of Hamas being killed is something that can affect such a complicated process. Yet we are not giving up. We are moving forward. We are continuing our discussions with the parties and trying to achieve as soon as possible an agreement that can bring a ceasefire and humanitarian relief and the release of the hostages.
I have little to understand why, on one level, the less I say about this, the better, except to say that we are relentlessly focused on bringing everyone home, and this was the subject of our conversations this evening as well.
Okay, meron lang akong public service, no? Okay, itong dating former Prime Minister po ng Pakistan, itong ay cricket national hero sa sport, itong si Prime Minister Imran Khan. Okay, meron pong FTI virtual fundraising, no? Kasi tatakbo ata ito sa ginangamit po ang Teleton. Okay, nandun ako sa Davao, meron po mga magkuhan ng mga bill tour dito, no? Telethon. Okay, so okay, live po kaya nga hinabol ko ito, live po ng alas 9 mamaya, no? Saan kayo ito time? Okay, anong difference time po ng Pakistan at saka Pilipinas, no? So biglang mag-pop up and then meron silang PTI, Virtual Front Racing Telethon, no? Okay, kung sino po ay marunong mag telethon, okay, fundraising ito, no? Political campaign ito, fundraising. Okay, si former Prime Minister Imran Khan, no? So, kung sino gusto mag-suporta kay Imran Khan, okay, kailangan po funding sa pang-election mga suki, no? Okay, so alas 9 po. Hindi ko lang alam dito sa Pilipinas kung anong difference po ng Pakistan at saka Pilipinas, no? Okay, fundraising. PTI. Okay, PTI, Virtual Fundraising Telethon. Ayan. Okay, so tulong na. Okay, pitsa 8 sa atin, mga kababayan. Hindi ko lang alam kung anong diferensya po ng Pakistan at saka Pilipinas, no? Wala akong global clock. Ayan. So, kung sino po ay magmamahal kay Imran Khan, okay, kay former Prime Minister Imran Khan, tulong na po. Okay, para manalo po sa election po sa Pakistan, mga kababayan, na. Sige. Ayan po mga suki, na. So, yan po, i-continue lang po natin itong ito na. Okay, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, meron silang press briefing ko kasama ng Qatar, no? Okay. Sige.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary. Thank you. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to ask you about the appropriateness of the Defense Secretary being in the hospital for days, including in intensive care, without telling the President of the United States, the National Security Advisor, or to our knowledge, anyone else in the National Security Cabinet.
Okay lang, mag-overtime mo ako.
Especially at a time when his deputy was on vacation and the number 3 of the Pentagon has not yet been confirmed in the middle of 2 wars. Were you aware of this? When did you learn of it? What is your threshold for transparency for a national security official or cabinet member, such as yourself, under those conditions? And a second question would be whether the suffering that you obviously feel so deeply of the Palestinians of all sides in this war has reached a point with, as you point out, 90% of the residents having food insecurity with potential permanent damage to them. Does this bring you any closer to believing that perhaps the Arab community is correct in calling for a ceasefire, and that this is not sustainable if you don't see some measure of response from Israel in your meetings to reducing the level of the targeting and the attacks to a more proportionate level, or is a permanent ceasefire? And if I may, Prime Minister Lebanon, we've discussed the Red Sea and the complications there. Do you believe that at this point, with a very strong warning that was issued by the State Department earlier this week and signed on by a number of other countries, do you believe that it is time for military action by a coalition? Or do you think that that would contribute to what you fear, what everyone fears would be an expansion of hostilities in the region? Thank you, sir.
Andrew, thank you. With regard to Secretary Austin, I wasn't aware of his medical issue. In fact, I talked to Lloyd last weekend before this, and I know that he's put out a statement addressing it. What I can say is this. It has been and remains one of the great privileges of my career over 30 years now, working in government to serve alongside Lloyd Austin. He is an extraordinary leader for this country, in uniform and now out of uniform. And it's been a highlight of my service to be able to serve alongside him, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing him fully recovered and working side by side in the year ahead. Again, I think he put out a statement addressing this. I'll let that statement speak for itself. Well, I won't get into hypotheticals. Let me say this in response to the second part of your question. As I said earlier, it is absolutely imperative that more be done, there will be more to protect civilians and, with others, enable more humanitarian assistance to get where it's needed, to whom it's needed, and that will be one focus of my conversations when I get to any country faced with what Israel had to face on October 7th, would want to do just that, make sure it could not happen again. And that means dealing with the threat that Hamas continues to pose. And as Hamas leaders themselves have made clear, they would, if given the opportunity, do this October 7th again and again and again. And that is not tolerable for any country, Israel or anyone else. But, as we've made clear also from day one, it's imperative that in dealing with this very, very difficult challenge, that it do so in a way that puts a premium on protecting civilians, making sure that people get the assistance they need. And as operations phase down, that will certainly make it easier to ensure that civilians are not harmed, and will also ensure that more assistance can get to people who need it. But I think it's also very, very important that to the extent operations continue, they be designed around protecting civilians and around getting humanitarian assistance to people who need it, not the other way around. And that will also be part of our conversations this week.
Of course, this one, our position is very clear on protecting the freedom of navigation, and what's happening in the escalation of the Red Sea is something unacceptable that we don't want to see in our country. And as I had mentioned, that this is unfortunately is one of the effects of what's happening right now in Israel. We believe that it's more important now to focus our efforts to reach and to reach a resolution to the situation over there. Military action, and regarding your question, Andrea, I think it's from other policy perspective, we never see a military action as a resolution. Of course, we see the events and what's occurring over there in the Red Sea, but our biggest worry is just to have the consequences all the time that will keep us in the loop that will never end, and will create real tension in the entire region. So we hope that we see a stop to what's happening to the civilian ships as soon as possible through a diplomatic means. That will be the best way possible.
John Hudson, Washington Post. Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, President Biden has said proposals to condition aid to Israel were a worthwhile thought in November when the death toll in Gaza was 12,000. Now the estimated death toll is almost double that, and the administration has rushed weapons to Israel in that time. Is conditioning military support to Israel a worthwhile thought, or is it the antithesis of what the administration would ever consider? Prime Minister Al-Thani, when it comes to planning for post-war Gaza, what are Qatar's conditions for playing a role on reconstruction? The U.S. is deeply involved in post-war planning. Does it have the requisite authority in the eyes of the Arab world? Thank you.
John, any military assistance we provide, any country, including Israel, comes with requirements, including that weapons be used in accordance with international humanitarian law, the laws of war, and that's something that we look at very carefully on an ongoing basis. And we will want to make sure, in this case as in any other case, that any weapons that we provide are used accordingly. That's something that we take very, very seriously, and we'll continue to do so.
Regarding, the post-war investment, we've been having these discussions thoroughly with the Secretary in this meeting, but also in the previous meeting. We always see that the priority for us is, first of all, to end this war. That will remain the priority. And after ending this war, to find a resolution for the situation in Gaza and the West Bank also cannot be separated from each other. The West Bank and Gaza should be dealt with as one unit, as of support of the state of Qatar for the Palestinian people. This is a policy for the state of Qatar that will continue and will not be affected by the situation, of course. And what we really want to see, we want to see a lasting solution for the Palestinian people to provide them with their state at the end of the day. That will be the only sustainable way that will preserve all of our effort and our investments for the long term.
Okay, tapos na ata. Tapos na po mga kababayan na. Okay, isang balita lang, no? Okay, tungkol sa stock market. Okay, ito po ay binabantayan natin mga kababayan, no? Okay. Ayan po mga suki. Stock market awaiting more positive catalyst. Wala ata pagbabago kanina. Okay, basahin po natin para updated tayo dito po sa stock market, no? Okay. Okay, mag-update tayo sa stock market para saan tayo papasok mga suki, no? Okay, last week, inflation news. Okay, last week, inflation news will not be enough, okay, to sustain the stock market upward trajectory, and investor remain hungry. Hungry mga kababayan, no? Kasi hindi kumita. Okay, remain hungry for more catalysts that could drive the sentiment this week. Okay, the benchmark Philippine Stock Exchange Index, PSEI, which started 2024 on a positive note, ended at 2.78% higher week on week at 6,629 when 64 last Friday. Okay, last Friday. Ayan. Okay, the market has been on an uptrend since bottoming last October 31, 2023. Stack Financial Incorporated senior research analyst Japet Tanchanko mga kababayan na. Japet Tanchanko noted. Okay. Hindi ko na mabasa po ang letra mga suki na. Okay. Sige lang, pilitin natin. Okay. Importante updated natin tayo na. Okay, Japet Tanchanko. Okay, Tanchanko, however, said the bourse would need more positive catalysts to sustain its momentum. Okay, well, the decline in inflation last December is seen to have a help in lifting sentiment. Investors are still expected to look further primarily at how the inflation trend and the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas policy path will be this year, he said, no? Okay, Rahina Capital Development Corporation Managing Director Luis Limlingan echoed the saying, we will try to see whether we can sustain momentum at a 6,000 level, where I think everything will be data dependent. Okay, without a positive catalyst, Tanchanko said the profit taking could occur this week. He added that investor would be looking at the upcoming labor markets and foreign direct investment data, both scheduled for release this week. Okay, magantay po naman ng lagay ng pera po sa stock investment, no? This week pa raw. Okay. Sige. Sige po. Okay, continue natin ang balita. Meanwhile, online brokerage, okay, to tradeasia.com said, kunin nyo itong kung gusto nyo mag-put up ng inyong mga kwarta, no? Okay, number 2, pakisulat, number 2, tradeasia.com, no? Number 2, yung number ba? Number 2, and then trade, Asia, yung T, capital letter, and trade. And then capital A, ang Asia.com. Makukuha nyo na ito mga suki, no? Capital letter po ang T, and then small letter trade, Asia, capital letter ang A, and then small letter ang kasunod, and then .com. Okay, yung meron mga katulad ko gusto lagi mag-suicide. Okay, kung wala ka naman suicide sa mundo ito, sa mundong ibabaw ito, okay, wala. Puro katalo. Kaya kailangan matapang mahilig ka mag-suicide mga suki, no? Ayan. Said the slowdown on December inflation to 3.9% was stronger than expected given seasonal demand and volatility-related downside risk. Ayan. Talagang risk po magnegosyo po rito mga suki, no? Pero kung matapang ka at marunong ka mag-subaybay, hindi naman mga suki, no? Kailangan ng lakas ng loob. Kasi pera ba? Okay, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas outlook remain conservative. But initial analysis of the trend does support a return to the ideal 2% to 4% CPI. Okay, Consumer Price Index range for range by year end. It said, adding that this fueled expectation for a positive rate adjustment if the upward trend continues. Okay, this week, to TradeAsia.com said investor site would ship to the United States CPI. Okay, palipat po sa Amerika yung maraming kwarta na. Doon po mag-put up sa Wall Street. Okay, sa Amerika po mga kababayan ng maraming pera. As the Federal Reserve, minutes just recently alluded to likely rate cuts sometime this year, but with an uncertain cadence, uncertain cadence and a rate of change. Chart-wise, the stock market major support is expected at a 6,400 level to 6,500 range, where major resistance is seen between 6,700 and 6,750 level, no? Okay, so maraming pera po sa stock market mga suki, no? Ayan. So yan po ang kasaysayan po stock market kasalukuyan kanina. Okay. Mag-antay po ng yung mga data i-release po mga kababayan, no? Ganun kasi yan. Okay. Hindi ka mag-suicide lagay ng pera. Okay, kung wala kang positive po pagkakitaan mga suki, no? Okay, tapos na ang balita. Ito na po mga kababayan, na. Okay, tapos na po ang balita. Okay. Paalam tayo sa gabing ito mga kababayan. No? Ayan. Okay, dito po sa Consolidated News. Okay, sa ADLSNTV News Online International. International po ang tirada natin. No? Okay. Okay, sa programa Halo-Halo Special Opinion Balita at iba pa. No? Okay, sama serbisyo publiko tinig ng mamamayan. And then sumbungan ng mamamayan, no? Okay. And then, wala tayong masamang tinapay dito sa programa natin, no? Always patas tayo. Okay. Hindi tayo magkampi po kahit kanino mga suki, no? Okay, information lang ang binigay natin sa publiko. Ayan. So, yan po ang dalawang okay, narinig nyo audio okay sa programa natin, no? Ayan. Kayo na po bahala mag-analyze, makinig ang mag-analyze kung ano po kahinatnan po ng kaguluhan po diyan po sa Gaza Strip, no? Okay. Matigil lang na tayo rito sa pag-monitor yan. Kung